Why are eggs suddenly the most stressful thing in the grocery cart? You stand there, staring at a basic dozen, and the price tag looks more like steak than breakfast. Again. We're told it's all about bird flu. Millions of birds culled. Supply chain in crisis. Nothing anyone can do. But here's what's strange. When federal investigators quietly announced an antitrust probe into the biggest egg companies in early 2025, wholesale prices suddenly dropped more than 60% in just days. Same birds, same barns, very different prices. So in this video, we're going to calmly unpack what's really going on with egg prices, what's true and what's missing from the story, and what ordinary families can actually do about it, with or without backyard chickens. If eggs feel like they've turned into a luxury item, this one's for you. Every winter now, the same pattern repeats. News anchors say bird flu every few minutes. Prices go up, shelves thin out, and families quietly start rearranging the grocery list, wondering what else they'll have to cut just to keep eggs on the table. Since 2022, highly pathogenic avian influenza has led to the culling of over 100 million birds in the US alone, with egg-laying hens hit especially hard. That really did squeeze supply and send prices higher. But here's the piece most people don't hear. Over the last year, American families spent roughly $14.5 billion more on eggs than in normal years, about double what the country usually spends. That's not just a minor bump. That's an entire extra egg industry's worth of money pulled out of household budgets. And while everyone was talking about bird flu, federal investigators were quietly asking a different question. Did some companies use this crisis as cover to push prices higher than they needed to be? Here at Family Yard Kitchen, we're not about fear or outrage. We're about understanding how the food system really works, and then building small, practical habits in our yards and kitchens that make our families less dependent on situations like this. So in this video, we'll walk through 4 big ideas. What the bird flu story gets right and where it stops short. Why prices stayed high even as production began to recover. The big genetics bottleneck no one talks about. And what real families can actually do, from local eggs to backyard flocks, without magical thinking. By the end, you'll understand not just why eggs got so expensive, but how to build a more stable, humane egg supply for your own family, one small step at a time. Let's start with the part you have heard: bird flu. Since 2022, waves of highly pathogenic avian influenza has swept through North America. Wild migratory birds carry the virus along their flyways. When it gets into commercial flocks, farms often have to cull entire barns of birds to stop the spread. It's brutal, it's expensive, and for egg-laying hens, it has knocked tens of millions of birds out of production. So when the news says egg prices are rising because of bird flu, there is truth there. Fewer hens means fewer eggs. Fewer eggs means higher prices. Simple supply and demand. But here's where the story gets fuzzy. You'll sometimes hear, well, those big barns are indoors, so how could they even get bird flu? Our backyard chickens outside are fine. They're healthier. The reality is more complicated. Indoor flocks can still be infected when virus particles hitch a ride on dust, feathers, or droppings that get pulled in through air inlets, or when the virus comes in on boots, clothing, or equipment moving between barns. Even with birds inside, many commercial farms were hit in this outbreak. On the other side, free-ranging birds do often seem more robust. They move more, they see daylight, they scratch in the dirt. But that freedom comes with more opportunities to intersect with wild ducks and geese, the main long-distance carriers of avian influenza. Studies actually show that free-range and backyard flocks can be at higher risk of first exposure, just because they share more space with wildlife. So the truth is, bird flu is real.
it did serious damage to egg supplies. Indoor birds are not magically safe. Backyard birds are not magically immune. And if you're thinking about your own flock, that matters. Good biosecurity, covered runs, clean water, changing shoes before you enter the coop is just as important in a small yard as it is on a giant farm. But even after we say all that, we're still left with that nagging question. If this is only about bird flu, why did prices stay sky high and sometimes even rise long after flock sizes began to recover? That's where we need to talk about who actually controls the egg market.
Picture this. You walk down the egg aisle, and it looks like there are dozens of choices. Different brands, different labels, cage-free, organic, omega-3, brown, white. Behind all that packaging, though, the U.S. egg industry is incredibly concentrated. The top handful of producers control a very large share of all the laying hens in the country. One company, Cal-Maine Foods, by itself supplies around a fifth of all shell eggs sold in the U.S. Now, concentration doesn't automatically mean wrongdoing. It does mean that when something goes wrong, a few companies' decisions ripple through the whole system. During the bird flu crisis, egg prices hit record highs, over $4 and even $5 a dozen in some months, while profits at the largest producers set their own records. Consumer groups and farm advocates started asking, are these prices only reflecting higher costs and lower supply? Or is there something else going on? In early 2025, the U.S. Department of Justice opened an antitrust investigation into whether major egg producers, including Cal-Maine and Rose Acre Farms, had coordinated to keep prices artificially high during the outbreak. Here's the part that made a lot of people's eyebrows go up. Right after news of that investigation became public, wholesale egg prices fell more than 60% in just a couple of weeks. Same barns, same trucks. Bird flu hadn't suddenly vanished, but something in the pricing behavior clearly changed. Now, it's important to say this clearly. An investigation is not a conviction. Courts will decide whether there was illegal price fixing. But for everyday families, the pattern is hard to ignore. Prices rise quickly when there's a headline like, "Worst bird flu ever." Prices drift down slowly or not at all when the crisis eases. And then they drop fast when regulators start asking hard questions. While all of that is happening at the top of the system, families are quietly doing math at the kitchen table, wondering, is it finally time to get our own chickens? Before we go there, there's one more invisible layer to understand, something almost no one talks about on the news. Here's a weird fact you'll probably never see on a grocery store sign. Most of the world's commercial egg-laying hens trace back to just two European companies, EW Group in Germany and Hendrix Genetics in the Netherlands. Together, they control something like 90% of the genetics behind the high-output layer breeds used on industrial farms. That means if you buy regular supermarket eggs from almost any big brand, the birds behind them are cousins, maybe very distant, but still family. This genetic bottleneck has two big consequences: slow recovery after outbreaks. When bird flu takes out a flock, farms can't just switch to a totally different breed from a local breeder at scale. They're locked into a handful of global genetics suppliers, which slows down how quickly the industry can rebuild. Another is system-level vulnerability. If a new disease strain hits one of these dominant genetic lines especially hard, there aren't many alternatives ready to go at industrial scale. It's like planting millions of acres with one variety of corn. Efficient when things go well, fragile when they don't. So where do backyard flocks and small farms come in? When families raise heritage or dual-purpose breeds, the kinds of birds that might lay a bit fewer eggs but live longer, handle mixed conditions, and bring genetic variety, they're quietly doing something bigger than just producing breakfast. They're helping keep backup copies of traits the industrial system has mostly bred out.
hardiness in different climates, ability to forage more of their own food, mothering instincts. Now, this doesn't mean your backyard flock will single-handedly save the gene pool, but it does mean that small, scattered flocks are part of a more diverse, resilient poultry picture, especially if they're managed humanely and carefully. And that brings us back to the question, does it actually make financial sense to raise your own eggs, or is this only about resilience and values? Let's be honest. Raising backyard chickens is rarely the cheapest way to get eggs, especially in the first few years. When you factor in a safe, predator-proof coop, fencing or a covered run, feed, bedding, grit, and basic supplies, occasional vet care or flock replacements, most careful cost breakdowns end up in the range of about $6.50 to $9 per dozen over several years, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on how you build and how efficiently you feed. So if you're only thinking in dollars per dozen, big box eggs will often win in a normal year. But here's where the calculus changes. When prices spike to $4 to $6 a dozen for basic eggs, when shelves go half empty for weeks at a time, when families are paying billions extra for the exact same food, then a small backyard flock starts to look less like a financial investment and more like a stability investment. And remember, home-raised eggs come with side benefits. You see how the birds are treated. You can control their diet. Kids learn where food really comes from. Manure becomes compost, which becomes garden soil, which grows greens to feed the birds, a little home loop. At the same time, there are real responsibilities we shouldn't gloss over. Biosecurity. Backyard chickens can catch bird flu. Keeping wild birds from sharing feed and water, cleaning boots, and watching for sudden illness matters. Food safety. Any egg, store-bought or backyard, can carry salmonella if undercooked. Proper cooking and clean handling are non-negotiable. Soil safety in cities. In older urban areas, backyard eggs have been found with, on average, over 40 times the lead levels of store eggs when hens forage in contaminated soil. Testing soil and using clean runs or raised beds is crucial if you live near busy roads or older paint. If a flock isn't realistic for you right now, there's still a powerful middle path. Support local farms and neighbors with chickens. While supermarket prices were jumping around, many small farms quietly kept their prices steady, often around $4 to $5 a dozen, because they price based on their actual costs, not on a commodity benchmark. So your options become store eggs when they're affordable and available, local eggs when the big brands go wild on price, backyard eggs if and when you're ready for that responsibility and resilience. None of those is right or wrong, but understanding the system lets you choose on purpose instead of feeling trapped by a price tag. So why are eggs so expensive, really? It's not a single villain, it's a stack of issues. A real bird flu crisis that genuinely reduced supply, an industry so concentrated that a few companies' choices affect everyone, a global genetics bottleneck that makes the whole system slower to recover, pricing behavior that may have pushed things far beyond what bird flu alone can explain, serious enough that federal investigators got involved. And in the middle of all that are families like ours, just trying to scramble some eggs without scrambling the budget. The good news is, we don't have to fix the whole industry to make a difference at home. We can build relationships with honest local farmers, plant gardens that soak up some of the pressure from the grocery list, start or improve small backyard flocks where it's legal and realistic with good biosecurity and clean soil. Teach our kids that food doesn't just appear on shelves. It starts with living things we're responsible for. That's the quiet power of a family yard kitchen approach. You don't have to shout, protest, or panic. You just keep building a life where the egg aisle has a little less power over you each year. If you're thinking about starting your own flock, or you already have chickens and want to tighten up care, biosecurity, and that garden coop compost loop, we poured everything we've learned into our book, Backyard Chicken Basics. It's a gentle, step-by-step guide
to making chickens a safe, steady part of your family's food story, not another source of stress. And if this video helped you see egg prices in a new light, feel free to subscribe and stick around. We'll keep sharing calm, practical ways to grow resilience right outside your back door, one meal and one small habit at a time.